We're assembled here on this Bill of Rights Day to do honor to the three great documents which together constitute the charter of our form of government. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights are now assembled in one place for display and safekeeping. Here, so far as is humanly possible, they will be protected from disaster and from the ravages of time. I'm glad that the Bill of Rights is at last to be exhibited side by side with the Constitution. These two original documents have been separated for too long. In my opinion, the Bill of Rights is the most important part of the Constitution of the United States. The longer I live, the more I am impressed by the significance of our simple official hold and defend the Constitution. Perhaps it takes a lifetime of experience to understand how much the Constitution means to our national life. You can read about the Constitution and you can study it in books, but the Constitution is not merely a matter of words. The Constitution is a living force. It is a growing thing. The Constitution belongs to no one group of people and to no single branch of the government. We acknowledge our judges as the interpreters of the Constitution, but our executive branch and our legislative branch alike operate within its framework and must apply it and its principles in all they do. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence can live only as long as they are enshrined in our hearts and minds. If they are not so enshrined, they would be no better than mummies in their glass cases, and they could in time become idols whose worship would be a grim mockery of the true faith. Only as these documents are reflected in the thoughts and acts of Americans can they remain symbols of power that can move the world. That power is our faith in human liberty. That all freedom-loving nations, not the United States alone, are facing a stern challenge from the communist tyranny. In the circumstances, alarm is justified. The man who isn't alarmed simply doesn't understand the situation, or he's crazy. But alarm is one thing and hysteria is another. Hysteria impels people to destroy the very thing they are struggling to preserve. Invasion and conquest by communist armies would be a horror beyond our capacity to imagine. But invasion and conquest by communist ideas of right and wrong would be just as bad. For us to embrace the methods and morals of communism in order to defeat communist aggression would be a moral disaster worse than any physical catastrophe. If that should come to pass, then the Constitution and the Declaration would be utterly dead, and what we are doing today would be the gloomiest burial in the history of the world. But I do not believe it is going to come to pass. On the contrary, I believe that this ceremony here today marks a new dedication to the ideals of liberty. Whether we will preserve and extend popular liberty is a very serious question, but after all, it is a very old question. The men who signed the Declaration faced it. So did those who wrote the Constitution. But each succeeding generation has faced it. And so far, each succeeding generation has answered it in the affirmative. I'm sure that our generation will give the same affirmative answer. So I confidently predict that what we are doing today is placing before the eyes of many generations to come the symbols of a living faith. And like the sight of the flag in the dawn's early light, the sight of these symbols will lift up their hearts so they will go out of this building helped and strengthened and inspired.
Constitution and the Bill of Rights is a common phenomenon in this country. Americans like to pay homage to these great documents, just as other people in other parts of the world like to pay homage to their kings or rulers. A stranger in our midst, ignorant of our institutions, might think it odd that we would wax so eloquent over some ancient scraps of paper. But the fact is, these papers are not historical heirlooms. They are the living, organic law of the land. We've gone on putting them to work, and they have thus far worked well. As this nation has gained maturity, so has it gained new insight and formed fresh aspirations for the work of its creators. We have need of this vision today. Ours has always been a faith based on reason. This, then, is the time for a new and fiercer faith in the Declaration and the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. This is a time for sharpening to the glistening point the aspirations which we have for them. We have the verdict of history thus far to prove the strength of our institutions and to show their worth in man's struggle to realize the highest hopes of man. A people who with great pride trace their political ancestry to the man who created these immortal documents should seek to emulate their valor and their vision. We can afford to do no less.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Simkin, and you are watching the Political Badass Podcast. Thank you very much for spending some of your Sunday with me. I very much appreciate it. Today is December 15th, 2024, and on December 15th of 1791, that is the date in history where the Bill of Rights were ratified. The Bill of Rights are actually the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The Constitution came after the Declaration of Independence. And what does this all mean? What does it mean to me? What it means to me is that this country was founded on the Judeo-Christian values of the West. And the further west you went through Europe and then across the ocean, when the Puritans came to America, they fled where they were from so that they would be able to practice their religion however and whenever they wanted. And we are at a crisis point in America right now. You know, we're celebrating the Bill of Rights and its ratification. And P.S., the Constitution would not have been ratified if the people were not promised to have a Bill of Rights, because those people in those days thought that even though the Constitution was an incredible founding document, it did not go far enough to protect the rights of the individual and allowed the government to become too large. And that's what we've been facing lately here in America, is that our government is become immense, a power that is being used and wielded against the people. This constitutional republic that we call America, the last frontier of true freedom for the individual, so that you could realize that if you go out and you work hard, you can accomplish anything in America. And those values and those virtues and beliefs have been challenged by groups of people. We would call them socialists. Some people would call them communists. It's anti-capitalist, anti-American is what it is. Our government has suppressed us with information. If you live in New Jersey, you know what's been going on with the drones that have been flying around our skies, and we're going to be talking about that soon. But really what I wanted to introduce you to is something I call Simkin Academy. This is the Political Badass Podcast. That notion is to get people out to vote and become civically engaged enough to where they can effectuate change in their local communities, in their states, and on the nation as a whole. But really, I've been seeking answers myself to a lot of the questions that we all ask ourselves, and maybe we don't ask them in public. I do. And I've been seeking answers, and the answers that I'm finding, they all come down to religion, believe it or not. I happen to be an American Jew. I don't think it matters whether we're Jews, Christians, or even Muslim. People that pray to Islam. I'm not a fan of Islamists, people that want to change the rule of law in America to follow a different rule of law called Sharia law and Sharia supremacy. We are totally against that. But certainly everyone has the right to practice their own religion. And that's why this country was what it was founded upon. And how do I know that that's what it was founded upon? Well, if we look at July 4th, 1776 on the screen right now, what you're looking at is just a copy of the verbiage of the Declaration of Independence, where it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created. And remember that word created, because we're going to be talking about creation shortly. They're created equally, and they're endowed by their creator with a capital C. Their creator, that means God. Okay, blessed be he, God. And they are among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall see most likely to affect their safety and happiness. It goes on much deeper than that. But what I want to stay focused and hone in on is the fact that we are endowed by our creator. And in my family, that creator is God. And the words of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, and of the Christian Bible, King James, it all starts out with Genesis. Paragraph 1, verse 1, we call it Bereshit in the Hebrew Bible. And it said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And right now in America, for the last 50 years, we've been raising children away from that very, very basic premise that there is a God, that God created everything, and that we really owe everything that we have on this earth to our God. And again, I'm not proselytizing to a Jewish God, Christianity. I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian values of the West that our founding documents that I just read through were formed upon and framed upon. And what I'd like to do now is show you a quick video from PragerU, because this is a political activist type of podcast where not only do I want to supply you with information, I want you to have the means to locate this information for yourself and share it with people that are important to you. I find PragerU has an amazing curriculum for people that homeschool their children. If you look behind me, they put out these pamphlets that you can get, A Kid's Guide to the American Dream, something that we've been hearing about a lot in the news lately, where the American dream's become unattainable. It's become unattainable because we've lost our way. We've lost our way because we've lost our God. I live close to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which used to have a very dense population of Jewish people, and it still does. But I'm noticing that the synagogues, these large synagogues with 1,000, 1,200 families at one point, they're merging with each other, which means that we're losing membership in these synagogues. We're losing participation in godly events. That's what's happening. Notre Dame Cathedral in France was just rebuilt after it burned down in 2019. And I saw information where only 2% of people that live in France attend Mass on Sundays. But something like 20 to 24% of the people, they go to a mosque to pray in the Islamic culture. So we are losing our foundationary principles and doctrines by not participating with God. And I don't know why, but I found myself much closer to God and praying on a daily basis out loud. And I've seen that my prayers are being answered. I've also been giving a lot more charity to people and organizations that I feel can help the greater good of humanity. In my local area, I've been giving to an organization called Chabad, Chabad. It's a Jewish organization, and we're going to be talking about the leader of that organization who has passed away, but some might have considered him to be the Messiah, actually, while he was living. leaders and millions of people have sought his blessing and his information and his insights into things. And he's a learned scholar. They call him the Rebbe, the rabbi. And when you're at that level of spirituality and able to function in America and share your spirituality with all denominations of people, it's really a miraculous thing, and we're going to see in a few minutes. But let's talk about the Bill of Rights and what that represents and how they were formed and framed. Here we go with the Bill of Rights from PragerU, and you can search that anywhere online. They have thousands of videos that you can pull, help educate yourself, help educate your children. Here's PragerU.
If you ask people to describe what is in the U.S. Constitution, most would begin by citing freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and maybe the right to bear arms. But in fact, these are not part of the Constitution that came out of Philadelphia in September 1787. They are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. They are part of what is known as the Bill of Rights. And why was this Bill of Rights necessary? The answer is that many Americans thought the Constitution, a document dedicated to limiting federal power, didn't limit that power enough. This was not a fringe opinion. People like Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, Patrick Henry, and George Mason all shared this fear. James Madison, one of the principal authors of the Constitution, disagreed. He argued that all the assurances the doubters wanted were already in the Constitution. They just needed to look a little more closely. But Madison, ever the pragmatist, came around, especially when it became clear that without those assurances, the Constitution would not be ratified. So Madison took it upon himself to draft the 10 amendments. The First Amendment is the most famous. It clearly sets out some of our most fundamental rights, the rights for which America has been universally admired. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. The Second Amendment protects the right of the people to possess firearms. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Third Amendment is the most obscure but made perfect sense to a citizenry that had, within recent memory, fought off the British Army. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. The Fourth Amendment prohibits the government from arresting you or searching your belongings without some reason to think that a crime has occurred. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause. The Fifth Amendment guarantees you a fair legal process before you're deprived of your freedom or property, and protects you from being put on trial for the same crime twice. It also protects you from having to testify against yourself in court. This is the source of the phrase, plead the fifth. And if the government takes your property to put it to public use, for example, to build a highway, you must be paid a fair price for it. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. The Sixth Amendment gives those charged with a crime the right to have a speedy trial with a lawyer by their side and to confront their accusers. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. The Seventh Amendment gives you the right to trial by jury in civil cases. In suits at common law, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. The Eighth Amendment protects you from unduly high bail and fines and antiquated forms of punishment. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. The Ninth Amendment makes it clear that if a right is not mentioned in the Constitution, it doesn't mean that right doesn't exist. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny others retained by the people. The 10th Amendment is, in effect, an insurance clause. It makes clear that any powers not reserved to the federal government belong to the states or the citizens. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. These are the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They have long been and remain an elegant testament to our understanding of freedom, the placing of strict limits on the power of government to interfere in our lives. It's hard to imagine America without them. I'm Sharif Girgis, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Notre Dame for Prager University.
So I did a little bit of social experimentation myself this week, with these drones going on in New Jersey. And I firmly believe pretty much from day one, there was a lot of buzz, no pun intended, on the internet about these drones and hypotheses and theories. I even saw an elected member of Congress, Jeff Van Drew from here in South Jersey, stand up on the news. And I got to tell you, I do give him credit for standing up and making a bold statement. But what I did realize immediately is that his statement that he made that appeared to be factual was based on a theory of someone who he claimed has very high authority and security clearance. With my limited scope of knowledge and experience in the military industrial complex, although I have friends that have, had high security clearances, none of whom would ever speak about anything that's tied to those security clearances because basically it's an imprisonable offense to share classified information that's secret. And there are rules that exist in the military and other organizations, whether you're civilian or not. When you take that oath to keep that secrecy and you do get thrown in prison, and they do throw away the key. So I kept saying to people on my Facebook page, which I have a decent number of followers on Facebook. I don't do as much on Twitter and the other ones, but on Facebook, I pretty much know how to work it, right? I haven't mastered Twitter yet, or X. But my point is that all of my posts were saying, hey, these drones are our military or our Space Force. They're doing drills, they're doing exercises and training. And I couldn't believe the backlash that I was receiving, mostly from friends, from conservative friends, where they're almost angry at me. And I understood it. And I said to them, listen, we do agree on most things. We don't agree here. But can we agree at least that if these drones are not foreign adversaries, that there's no, mothership sitting off the coast of New Jersey, as Jeff Van Drew stated as fact on the news, which caused a little bit of chaos, in my opinion, in the people and in the purview of the people that I connect with on Facebook. I think it was a wrong thing to do. I think, though, that part of a military exercise and drill is the public's reaction to the same thing. And those things are measured actually through social media. That's why Elon Musk has such an important role in this new government that we've elected through the election and the clean sweep of Donald J. Trump to be elected president of the United States. We won a mandate. We won the popular vote. We won every swing state 7-0. We won the House and the Senate. That's the trifecta. That's the presidency, House of Representatives, and Senate. And then we won the popular vote to top it off. That's a full mandate on the people that Donald Trump is going to insert into our government to get this ship turned around and going back in the right direction. And it just led me to see how wrong of a direction we are in. It was almost as if when I'm watching about these drones on my Facebook responses, and I even put this in one of my posts saying, I apologize if I'm upsetting you, but this basically looks like the same reason why people watch hockey games, ice hockey, and the same reason why people watch NASCAR. And really, it's because people that watch hockey like the fights, and people that watch NASCAR like to watch the crashes and see what happens. It's human nature. I'm not being critical of those people that watch those sports, or if they watch it for that reason or not. I'm just stating that my opinion on things is that we've been lied to, we've been mistreated by our government for decades, and we're all starting to realize it, and we just don't have any faith or confidence. So we automatically assume the worst. But here I'm a pretty, straightforward person. I'm not afraid to go smash mouth with people. You want to argue with me? I will sit there and have the argument to the end. I will spend my time to discuss this with you. I'm certainly not a keyboard warrior. Okay. And I'm not afraid to go talk in public about these things. But I really was shocked at how many people that I know and even that I don't know were really almost hopeful that it was China, that it was China flying these drones. But those things didn't make sense from a mathematic perspective. What are the odds that these drones are flying with safety lights on them so that other craft don't hit them if whoever is flying them doesn't have a vested interest in the safety of the public? I was making common sense approach to things, and I was met with nonsensical approaches. So here I'm common sense and I'm dealing with nonsense. And I didn't get mad at anybody. I left most people that didn't agree with me that their hours that were performing, an exercise. And what's scary to me is what the exercise is driven by. And I think it's probably searching on how to find a dirty bomb or find something that's radioactive, because you do have Iran, who has not created a bomb. And we're going to talk about that later in the program when I bring on a mathematician video of a guy named Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. He uses calculus actually in a computer program to predict outcomes in foreign policy. It's very interesting. I learned about it in about 2010, and I've been sitting on it all this time. I actually forgot about the knowledge that I had about this guy and how politics really work. But you have to understand how politics really do work. When decisions are made by politicians, they're not just a politician sitting in their office, president on down the lane. They're not just sitting there making these decisions. They're going to their advisors, which are cabinet members. That's why these cabinet members are so important. Look at the cabinet members that Biden had, Austin, from the Secretary of Defense. He disappeared. He went AWOL when he had a heart surgery or some sort of surgery, right? He didn't tell his boss, the guy that holds a nuclear football, that he's going to be out of contact, incommunicado, for several days. That is not a good thing. Okay, the chain of command in our military was broken from the very top link. He wasn't fired. At least with Donald J. Trump, if he puts somebody in that's wrong, he's going to shit can him faster than you could say you're fired. We've been witnessing these things over and over and over through the COVID lockdowns, through the vaccines. These are good. They're good. They were never good. When they create a biochemical weapon, at the same time, they're creating the vaccine for the biochemical weapon. And this time they decided to use what's called an mRNA platform, which can deliver any type of vaccine, and it changes your RNA. It's not a good thing. It's just not. But we've been led to believe so many things that it's almost like we've lost our ability to be independent thinkers, and that has to come back. It has to come back through public education. We are miseducating our children from the ground up, and we have been for about 50 years, maybe longer. And that's what I really focus on. And if you notice on my screen, it no longer says Political Badass in the center. I still have the logo there on the right and the left. It says Simkin Academy because I have a need to learn what I'm witnessing. And at the same time that I'm spending my time to learn, I would also like to teach you. And I'm also calling for anybody that has a vast experience in any of these topics to reach out to me at simkinacademy.com or ericsimkin.com, or call me on my phone, text me, or Facebook message me. And I'd love to have you on this podcast. I'm not looking to make this podcast some sort of thing for fame, money, monetization. I could care less about that. If anyone knows me, I don't really care about money. I have it. Okay. And I spend it on what I feel I can make the most impact on people with. But no, I don't care about making money. I care about making an impact and educating people, because I feel like we have been totally misled, totally led away from the spirituality of God. and we don't even know what to believe. But one thing holds true, okay? Any type of time, effort, or anything that you put into God, you're not going to get hurt. That I can promise you. And when it comes to these drones, you can't be a drone. Don't allow yourself to be part of the groupthink. If 10 people are telling you it's China and you're the 11th person, you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to fight them and argue with them either. You could choose not to engage. But sometimes I feel like there's an obligation to set people straight, because why am I going to let people that I care about know or potentially could influence their decision making? Why not just let them know what I think? Give them a different objective opinion to look into. Get back to independent thinking, because this country was founded on principles that help rise up the individual, not groups. The type of government that rises up groups, that's a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a constitutional republic of the people, by the people, for the people. Remember civics. We don't teach it anymore in school. The reason we don't teach civics in school, the reason why we don't teach constitutionality in school, is because of the separation of church and state. It was a huge mistake. How could you possibly take out God from education when the absolute founding principle of America is what I told you earlier, Bereshit, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. God sees everything, right? God is everywhere. God hears and sees everyone. If you don't believe in those things, you don't believe in thou shalt not steal, one of the most important commandments. Personally, I think thou shalt not lie is one of the most important commandments, because if you're going to lie, you'll steal too. And if you'll steal, where do you stop? Do you stop at stealing? No, maybe you'll commit a murder. Thou shalt not kill. How do you understand those principles of the Judeo-Christian West, of the founding documents, doctrines, and inherent life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that we have here in America if you take God out of the equation? So I'm going to bring up a video now of the Rebbe. The Rebbe is a rabbi. Rabbi is a spiritual leader, but this is much more than a spiritual leader. This is a dynasty. It's considered a dynasty going back to, I think, the 1700s or so. And he's the fourth rabbi in the succession of the dynasty. And the previous Rebbe before him was his father-in-law, actually. And he became the Rebbe. Many people think that he was the Messiah. Jews believe that there's a 6,000-year period before the Messianic period starts, and we're at about 5782. So we got about 220 years left before the Messiah comes. I'm sorry, my Christian brothers and sisters. We believe that the Messiah has not come yet. We're waiting for the Messiah. We have some divergence in our Bibles, but they all hold true with the Judeo-Christian values. That's why they're called that, because our Bibles are absolutely intertwined with Genesis, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the book of Moses that has most of our laws that we follow here in America. And that's why there is anti-Semitism, because, the Jewish people have had these laws for almost 6,000 years, far longer than anybody else. As a matter of fact, people say that the Jewish people are the only people that are left from antiquity. And the Chinese people are left from antiquity too, but they totally changed their worldview. The Jewish people are the only people to date from antiquity that have not changed their worldview. And there's much more to learn about religion than I could possibly share with you, because I'm not a scholar. I'm just here trying to help myself be a better person, help my community, and help my fellow man and women, of course. And I'd like to bring on the Rebbe when he talks about separation of church and state. It's very, very important that you read the subtitles, because these videos that I'm going to share of the Rebbe, they are in Yiddish. And the Rebbe, again, the dynasty that he is the Rebbe of, or was, he died in 94 or 96, I believe, is a dynasty called the Chabad Lubavitch. And Chabad, you see them in most towns. This man created the outreach to save the Jewish people from fizzling out after World War II, because we were almost annihilated. We were almost wiped off the face of the earth in the Holocaust. There's 3,000 of these Chabad houses across the country and across the world. Recently, I was out visiting a very sick relative, Stu, my future father-in-law, who, by the way, has been in ICU for almost 6 weeks now, through about 8 surgeries. And we pray every single day out loud. We give charity in his name, and our prayers are being answered on a daily basis. Sorry to be emotional. It's been a very tough run for my family for the last couple months, and we're on the home stretch here, and we're going to see this through so that eventually Stu can walk his daughter, Tina, my future wife, down the aisle for our marriage, which will happen this year, God willing. And so without further ado, let me bring up the Chabad rabbi, the Rebbe, on separation of church and state.
In the United States, there is much debate about the separation of government and religion. Yet, based on the spirit in which the Constitution was written, government should do more to support schools that nurture a belief in God.
Die Medina ist Yassid geworden. I das gewinn verbunden mit dem Leben in der Nebelschen. Mis gelaufen Herz zu Kedeme soll können dienen dem Nebelschen Leitseher Havone. Aber Belima Fria Umstellungen, das ist eine Sache, was wie jeder Linie von Chinuch, kommt das nicht von sich allein, sie darf sein der Chanechle nahe. Bischaß noch ein Kind, oder demol darf einem schön Mechanisch sein. A viele in der Sache kleinere Sachen. Sicher, aber darf ein Mechanisch sein, dem in dem Yeseda Yeseda war Muda Chochmes. Leider שיש schon Motze Rischen. Doi der Yeseda war Muda Chochmes, soll wissen sein, als sie do der Eberste, was da. Und was kommt tun, in der Fall, was sie do der Motze Rischen, wo das der Eberste, was in der Mokel hat Teva Chesed. Der Pilpul mit Schakle Vitali, was ist der Perisch von Constitution, zieht als jeder Perisch, als jeder Perisch. In die Gerät früher, wir kommen nicht Cheshe sein, aber ihr gewollt schreiben, Heper, von dem ganzen Jesod, zu welchen sie seinen gelaufen in Nazis Abris. A viele ihm Timzalemer, a viele am soll sagen, als es schwer reinteitschen das in den Blätter, in der Esis, gibt Schutter. Und dort kam man drochi, was mir konnte helfen, dem Chinuch. Als was sie verbunden mit der Muna. Es auf Nicker, hat die Constitution gemacht geworden, zu lieb dem Amsche Hamedine, nicht der Amsche Hamedine, zu lieb der Constitution. Bane Gehle, Pele, wie gerät früher, alleine Massere, alleine Tradition, was auf welche sie nicht jasset geworden oder die Medine, ist zu erwarten, mit sicher gefunden Weg. Unheimlich von dem, was hat sicher geworden, als soll stehen, Bereich am Medina. Suchen Wegen, was sie erreicht zu helfen, dem Chinuch, was sie verbunden mit der Muna, in Abele, Elum und Manige, so Elum, Kule, Echit angeschlossen, Arzis Abris, also soll sein begründet auf eine Muna in dem Ebersten. Und wie gerät kam Pomi, wie wir sehen in Aseres Adibris, als Bischaß Eder Mekum, zu Lei Sirzach, zu Lei Signe, macht man der Hagdoma, sie darf sein an der Muna in dem Ebersten. Die Jugend wart nicht und halt im Wachsen. Und man sieht sich wie Befehl, als Beschaß, wir können heute reinnehmen und reden mit dem wegen der Muna. In der Nebesten muss man das tun heim, wir können das nicht ablegen auf morgen, weil wir wissen nicht, was sie treffen in die Scheuche Bintei. Ist jeder mit sich Eisteine, mit der alle Schakle, Vitali, so viel Pulim, werden sicher gefunden auf Weg, es nur sein der Yogaito, aber soll schön geben dem Maximum, was sie nötig sagt, nicht nur auf den Bissus von Bote Sefer, wo sie seine verbunden mit Chinuch Dati, mit Mamuna Bashem. Nur in der Neufmann, wir soll sie können mit Wasser sein und mit Chasik sein und mit Spaschi sein, wie Koomur Lehil. Aber der Inge von einem nicht dem, was mit Kleibt ist, soll sich nicht rechnen. Mit den Tejeles, mit den Nussen, wie sie gewöhnt früher versteht von den Kwutzer. Was ich teig von der Kwutzer, wie bald selber kommen an Minui Godel Jeser, unter demult Jochid Verabim, Haloche Kerabim, darf sich rechnen mit den Nutzen von der Klolis Amedine, auf Alpi, was sie kann sein als ein Teil von sein Kwutze, wird der Mieter schon nicht Maskim sein, und dass sie tegen sein werden nicht Lefischo, so werden sie sehen, dass sie sehr Tejeles.
So why do I choose to share the words of the Rebbe with you? You know, I know not everybody that watches this podcast is Jewish. And again, I'm not here to proselytize. In general, Jews don't do that. I'm here to share with you because these are the Judeo-Christian values of the West. The reason why the Puritans came here, he says, it was to avoid the religious persecution so that they could practice the religion. How, when they should, when they want to. And here we separated out from education God. And as he says, the presence of God, basically, that is what is predicated by all of our laws. Our laws exist based on God, on creation. It was in our founding documents that I read to you earlier, and how quickly we've forgotten. That video was from 1975. Far before the institutionalized overtaking of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is the new state-sponsored religion that they're replacing our God with. They, the people that promote socialism, communism, the thing that stands for groups of people that are oppressed, that's what communists and socialists do. They try and do mob rule, that they get all these groups together so that they represent the majority. And then the people that were strong, they get overrun by the weak over solidarity. And we cannot allow it to continue for another minute, not for another day. As a parent, I know that even me, as hard as I work at being a parent, I failed my children. But somehow, some way, I was able to instill enough of an identity in my children to know that God exists, that God is omnipresent, that God created the heavens and the earth. The foundation of our education system needs to be reverted back. And that's why Donald J. Trump, when he was elected by us, by we the people, with a full mandate to do what it takes to right the ship. I'm talking about being able to send your child to a private school, a parochial school, a Jewish school, whatever type of school you want with universal school choice. Okay, because we are sending our kids to these public schools where they're being indoctrinated into ideologies that are completely against the Judeo-Christian values of the West. How are you going to allow that to continue? You cannot. My parents and parents of most Jewish families, we send our kids to Hebrew school, just like when I was going to school and public school and all my Catholic friends went to CCD, to have those values, virtues, and beliefs instilled into us so that we had an identity, so we didn't have an identity crisis, so we weren't seeking to form small groups to combine with others in group thought. We were independent thinkers, proud to be who we are and what we're made of. There's nothing wrong with that. That's where we need to go back to. And on that, I do need to share with you another clip, and it's a long one, I'm sorry, of the Rebbe talking about education and talking about the role of the parents, because that's another issue that we have. We're all guilty of it. You know, we've lost our way. We spend much time on other things besides our children, besides being truly devoted to the upbringing of our children. It can't be more important, and the timing can't be any possibly better than right now for this education on Simkin Academy. Please take a look at what the Rebbe has to say about education.
Welchen Halser der ganze Binyan, von der ganze Chevre, von der ganze Gehilis, von der ganze Gwutzes Anoshim wie Tat, also sein Lo Sheves Yitzora, nicht Chas Visholem Ish Esreyehu, Ilmoli Miro Shel Malchus, wo das hängt ab, a der Chinuch hebt sich mit Chilosei, בחנך לנער noch Gott klein auf a gesunden Jesod und noch gam Kijavskin le Yosser Mimeno. Was der gesunde Jesod wie der Mond frier, Punkt also wie der Jesod von dem ganzen Bashar, das Breishis Bore Lekim, es a Shamayim Vesoretz, also der gesunde und der Emisser, und der einzige gesunde Jesod von Achinach, von Akin, als soll wissen sein, als Breishis Bore Lekim, es a Shamayim Vesoretz, als jesh Balabais lebiro zu, und se nicht nur a Balabais auf a fertige Gire, nur dass se Bore Lekim, dass se der, was hat aufgebaut die Gire, hat aufgebaut die Welt, und ist 4 Tonnen mit der Welt, und Maschgiach, Baschgocha Protis, auf alle Protis von der Welt, und will, als in der Welt soll sein in der Nefen, wie der Mond früher, da soll sein der Schlitter, da soll gewältigen Zedek, Vejeshe, Vechesed und Mishpot, Lichtigkeit und Reinkeit und Heiligkeit. Soll sein Niker, als der Rebester hat dort sein Giere, wo das ich komme, wie bald der Mensch beschaffen geworden, Tage durch Nebesten. Aber der Rebester hat gewollt mit dem beschaffen, wie Elchol Levovcho Bishnei Zerecho, mit der Jetzer Tev und nicht mit der Jetzer, was erhebt von Jetzer Tev. Was hat Dämmel kann sich treffen einmal, am Matze von Maimed, wo der Jetzer, was erhebt von Jetzer Tev, soll Matzliach sein, in sein Milchoma mit dem Jetzer Tev. Und soll wellen Peil sein auf den Menschen, soll sich fühlen, wie wird gestuft von dem Jetzer, was erhebt von Jetzer Tev. Soll nicht halten von sich und von seiner Gerechtigkeit und von seinem Hoch. Es eben hat ihm noch nicht zu kaletschet, nicht mit Kalkul gewährt, Rachmone Litzlan, durch Achinuch, was tegnet, weiß es am Maimin ben Maimin, als sie da an Ebester, was wird angerufen, beschem Ebester beloschen, Bnei Yoda, der Fall, was jeder weiß, dass ist Ebester, von jeder Menschen und von allen Menschen, und hat an ein Rehe, der Eisen Schemas, und im Jesosser, ich bin Historim, ist doch, als soll trachten, als war nicht Lehrerin. Was hat das bewohnt dem Kind, wenn noch ein Narr, soll Chatchile wachsen in der Nefen, als weiß, als Schelcho, das, was gehört als zweiten Kind, ist nicht nur le Signe, nur rechet a viele le Sachmeid. Der Masse Befehl ist kommen, a hunderte, tausende jüdische Kinder, Millionen nicht-jüdische Kinder, bekommen sie ein ganzer Chinuch in Public School, wie mir sagt, der Masse Befehl bei Medina so, als Eltern haben keine Zeit nicht, a viele, die was haben Zeit, haben nicht keine Geduld, als sie sollen sich abgeben mit den Chinuch von ihren Kindern. Wir fragten noch, als schickte mir weg in Public School und mir gibt mit einem guten Sandwich und noch 2 Sandwiches Und man gibt ihm noch mit Geld, soll können noch geben, teilweise Liebe. Noch mehr, wie viel sie da in dem Sandwich, hat man sich eingerät, dämmelt hat man jetzt gewöhnt. Der Cheves Hoa oder Cheves Hoa zu dem Sohn oder zu der Tochter, wo mir sagt, dass sie sollen sein angetan, sehr schön. Und redet, dass ein Mädel soll, sie können bald nicht kleiden, oder jeder Tag, oder Alkoholponnen jeder Woche. Und der Rike soll sein eine schönere Kleidung, wie die Chabetes haben, und nicht gucken, was sie verbunden mit Geld ist, ist mir sich messer neffisch und mir leid Geld, die können sie geben noch ein Kleidung für die Mädel. Weil der ich sehe, noch ein Toi für die Mingel. Die Mädel hat sich im ganzen Jetze gewöhnt, Chivosse zu den Kindern, ich wollte da vertrachten werden noch. Aber der Kind wächst stets, mit der Minie, wo die Medine spatten mal rein. Aber man soll wissen, seine Kirche weiß zum Jodi, außer Liesa Chayla See. Jeder ist ein Pionier und jeder kann machen von der Wüste nicht. Machen davon ein Riel Mescher und wir bringen gleich eine Reihe von der Medine und Divrie in der Medine. Die Mädel da verrechnet wissen sie, eine Seele Meile im Mann. Sie ist ein Smart Boy und sie ist ein Smart Girl. Die Mädel darf sie echt nutzen, sehr dies und sehr hoch, was wir lernen, sie in Public School, diese soll können echt spielen, und das, was bei sie kommt, das wird Zähne. Und sie sagt, die mit Duber kam auf Pomim, sie in kein Stil nicht zu kein Sache. Beschaß mit Tonnen jeder Tag in einer Public School. Aber mit Sorgen jeder Kind und alle Kinder. Also neben dem Tag, aber jeder noch lernen, Rechnen und Geografie mit allen guten Sachen. Und nötige Sachen, was durch den Ruf kommen, ist durchgehend die Welt und haben ein paar Nosse für Chulu. Aber Lechelere ist gitten in dir eine Rege aufzuschweigen. Und beschaß, bei dem Schweigen sollst du trachten, lege Anweisungen von die Vater mit der Mutter oder von der Seide, von der Bobbe, wo sie werden dir anweisen, wegen wo du sollst trachten. Und das wird sein, eine Scholle, ein Nemeser ohne von dem Tod, als es sein, ein Päschen Bibrocho, aber noch wird er sein gebencht, in die Afesnutzen, die Idis, was lernt dann noch bei Meschachayim, soll sie nutzen in einem neuen Teil, wie schwierig für sich, was zusammen damit das Eche Tevlo Elom, der Adrabe mit der Seder Hoffnung, früher wird trachten, was ist gut für Arun Lo Elom, und nicht noch das Eche gut für ihn, und Machrie sein, der Tevlo Elom, wo der noch wird das Eche darauf kommen, Befehl bei Anoge Massima. In Ruf ist mit Madgisch, als es darf sein, darf kein Regelschel Sika von Schweigen. Nur der Regelschel Sika darf sein nicht als ein Dover Toffel, im Mittentag oder zum Sofentag, wenn der Kind ist schon vermattet und hat sich schon angelernt und angehört, weiß was für eine Sachen, nur der Mie darf anheben sein Tag. Die einzige Sache, wo der Prinzipal oder der Teacher, der Kajese bese, kann sie sagen und darf sie sagen, als hebt an den Tag von einer Regel, von Schweigen, das aber nicht has wie Scholem Kedei, soll weg in einer Regel Levatolo, mit nicht gewähnen in ein Kind, als kann gehen Levatolo. Ein Kind darf wissen, als darf es nutzen seine Zeit und seine Kirche. Darf man ihm sagen, als das Schweigen seine, ich das sehe, der Teil von seinem Chinuch, aber dem und Bemele darf das es nutzen durch ein Machshava Tevo, in was besteht der Machshava Tevo, darf das fragen bei seinem Vater und bei seiner Mutter. Meisaf auf die Tieles Amur Lehil, man darf aufwecken, Vaters und Mutters in der Medine, als sie sollen wissen, wenn sie Schlichus Achi Ikris, wo das ist der Halbschlichusseele, als sie sollen aufstellen, der Schor im Gewehre. Wo das kommen nicht durch für den Beschleimus, durch den Zweiten. Das darf man allein nicht nur zulegen, eine Hand dazu, nur zulegen dazu der Herz und die Kopf und der Tirche und dem Zman, und der Kind soll sehen, als nimmt das mit dem ganzen Herzen und mit dem ganzen Simas Lev und mit dem ganzen Chais und hat das nicht gehe, dem Vater mit der Mutter, der Chaie nach Mama. Wo dämmelt werden die Kinder Heshev Lev Wavis Albonim alle Debonim, werden die Kinder durch Seele Scheiles jeder Tag beim Vater mit der Mutter, Herr Zachai, ich darf gehen nicht in den Public School, wo du schickst mir dahin zu. Und der Teacher wird mir sagen, ihr sollt trachten. Darfst du mir sagen, wegen was ihr sollt trachten?
Those are some of the most beautiful words I've ever heard as a parent, I will tell you. And some of the things that stand out to me, and I hope they stand out to you, is that when you start your day talking about creation, God created the heavens and the earth, boom, right? A child ultimately learns throughout that day with the reading, writing, and arithmetic that they should be teaching in school, not the values, virtues, and beliefs that parents need to be teaching their children, that they will learn what's theirs is theirs, what's yours is yours. And that most parents lack the time. And if they do have the time, they lack the patience to do this for their children. You know, we have Planned Parenthood in the schools, Planned Parenthood. This is planning for parenthood. Okay, not talking about gender reassignment surgeries, puberty blockers, promiscuity, sex, sexuality, and gender. All those things need to be removed immediately from the curriculum. If they're not, you need to remove your child from the school because they are not raising your child. You're raising your child, and you're allowing your child to be raised into an ideology that absolutely 100% conflicts with the values, virtues, and beliefs of our gods. And it needs to stop. It really does. The moment of silence thing, I think, is amazing. When you think about what he's saying, is that it's not for the teacher to tell them what to think. It's for the parents to tell the child what to think during that moment of silence. And don't waste that moment of silence, he says, because you shouldn't be wasting any of your time on anything. Your time needs to be valuable because you're learning. And the more you learn, the better you'll do with your skills. And the merit will be instilled in you to achieve great things in your life, to be productive members of society. We are not teaching our children right now to be productive members of a society, unless that society that you want your kids growing up and raising their children into is socialism, communism, autocracy, or even worse. We need to pay attention, friends, of what's been going on. We've had the wool over our eyes. The fog is starting to lift. The dust is starting to settle. We have a new opportunity in 2025 to rebuild our great nation and our families by putting 100% of our effort back into our children, something that many of us have forgotten about. I did the best I could. I'm going to do better as a father, as a man, as a human being for others, because I'm inspired by these things and I want to inspire you. And if you can bring inspiration, please bring it, and bring it to your friends and bring it to your family. Bring it to your dinner table. Do something different. If you're a Christian, a Catholic, go to church. You know, take communion if that's what you were taught to do. Connect back to what you were taught as a child, to what our parents did for us, for countless generations before us. We owe it to our children, to our future, because without it, without the values, virtues, and beliefs of a God, that God created the heavens and the earth, we will have nothing in this country. We've already seen where it leads. We've almost been pushed to the brink of having nothing. You were locked down. You are told what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot say, what information can or cannot be provided to you by our government. It's all stopping. We have a new lease on life. We have a new government that we just elected. Be supportive of that. Make your voice heard in your communities. Go to your school board meetings and tell them you want a moment of silence. This is what you want. Are you going to accept any less for your child? I am not going to accept 1 ounce left for my family. Less. I'm going to push for more. You know, when your kid goes off to school and says, Mom, Dad, don't forget, I need you to tell me what to think about today during my time at school while they're teaching me reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay, because they're not going to have the other 3 hours worth of bullshit, wrong information, misinformation, disinformation. You know, you feel like a girl today, you could be a girl. You could be what you want to be in America. You could change your sex. You could change your gender. Okay, here's the Simkin Academy 101 you need to hear. Okay, there's 2 sexes, male and female, and that's it. There's no such thing as gender. Gender is a socially constructed idea, okay, of how you identify. Okay, and if you identify differently than your sex, then that is part of your personality, of which there are unlimited personalities. That is my approach to sex, sexuality, and gender, like it or not. So what we're going to finish up with is a more modern theory on politics and how politics and policies and foreign relations and foreign policy is formed and framed, and how the interactions of people affect the decisions of what politicians make on our behalf. And it's based on vast amounts of information and data. And I don't know who's been making the decisions and what data they've been relying on for the past 40 or 50 years, but I could tell you that's what brought us to the brink. And it's time to change it. So this guy, Bruce Bueno de Mesquita, NYU professor of political science. There is a science to politics, actually. It's mostly calculus, where you plug in these pretty crazy, insane numbers into things and you get outcomes. And what it's all about is predicting outcomes to situations. And you can use these types of things in what's called game theory, GAME theory. It's basically the concept of what people are willing to do to win or lose in any kind of sport, any kind of event, any kind of competition. And this guy has it figured out, built a computer model that's right 90% of the time in politics. It's a long one. It's about 8 minutes. I know we're over our time for today, but we're just going to keep rolling because that's how I roll. Bruce de Mesquita. Remember the name. These are the types of organizations that are framing the policies that we're being forced to live by. And we need to understand that so that when you're seeing information, you understand how to digest it. Who has the biggest purview of interactions? Social media companies, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Those are the 2 people on this planet that have the most knowledge and access to information and data about what the constituency of America is thinking about and of the globe. So we do need to be cautious and we do need to be careful, and we need to include them in what we're doing, and we need to hold them at a close check, just like we need to keep our government in check with something that hasn't happened for a long time. Take a look at this video. I'm going to leave you with that for the day. I want to say thank you for spending some of your time with me, and God bless you. God bless your family. God bless your children, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Prediction is not anything new, of course. People have always been trying to predict. You know, they stare up at the stars and try to figure out what they mean. Nostradamus stared at a bowl of water to figure out what was going to happen in the world, and then wrote some mumbo-jumbo quatrains, which only after the events people could look at and say, he predicted that. Very smart guy. And all of those methods have one thing in common: they don't work. So what I want to talk about is a way to predict and to engineer future events that does work. And when I say it does work, I want to put a marker down. As mentioned, the Central Intelligence Agency has evaluated my models in a couple of thousand applications. And it's not just that they've concluded that the models are more accurate than their analysts, which indeed they have concluded, which doesn't make their analysts terribly happy with me. They concluded it's right about 90% of the time, and it is it hits the bullseye more than twice as often as their analysts. Game theory is about working out the strategic responses of people, anticipating what they will do, and choosing your best moves given what you think others will do. Now, game theory makes a few very simple assumptions about people. Game theory assumes people are rational. By rational, all that is meant is that people try to do what they believe is in their best interest. Rationality does not mean looking at all of the various options that a person has and choosing the best one. Indeed, if you try to look at everything you could do, you're probably behaving irrationally, because the cost of continuing to search eventually is going to exceed the expected gain of the continued search. And when the cost exceeds the gain, it makes no sense to keep on looking. So rationality just says people do what they believe is in their best interest. Now that means that people have values and people have beliefs. Values are the things that they want. And people are free, of course, to choose their values. They're shaped by their families, by their experience, by the cultural environment that they live in. There's nothing rational or irrational about what people want. There is something rational about what they do to achieve what they want. So they have values and they have beliefs. They have beliefs, for example, about how other people will react to them. What sorts of people others are. Are they the kinds of people who want to be tough, bully them? Are they the sorts of people who want to cooperate and try to find compromises and so forth? That means they face uncertainty. They know their beliefs are just that, beliefs. They're not certain knowledge about how others will respond. And they make choices under constraints. Besides the beliefs and the uncertainty, they have some pool of resources. They're limited by what they have. If you are the king of Nepal, you might aspire to conquer Europe. You just don't have the wherewithal. You are constrained. You know that you are constrained. You can't do it. That's game theory reasoning. It's working backwards, thinking about what's the other guy going to do and then deciding what your actions should be. Okay, so if one wants to construct a model to analyze foreign policy problems, how do we start? Well, for one thing, we want to think about who are all of the individuals and groups that will try to shape a decision on a given policy, not just who are the key decision makers who will make the policy. For example, if we're thinking about what to do about Iran's nuclear program, we know that the President of the United States will make a policy choice. But let's face it, President Obama probably doesn't know a lot about Iran. So he's going to turn to his advisors. He's got his Secretary of State, he has a National Security Advisor, he has a Secretary of Defense, he has a Secretary of Energy, and so forth. He's going to turn to these people and ask, what do you think we should do about Iran? What will be the effective strategy? And let's face it, Stephen Chu is a very, 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 very smart man. He used to be my next-door neighbor. I babysat for his children. He's got a Nobel Prize in physics. He knows about particles interacting. He does not know a lot about people interacting strategically, and he probably doesn't know much about Iran. Hillary Clinton probably doesn't know that much about Iran either. So they have advisors. They turn to their advisors who do know about Iran, about energy policy, about nuclear developments and so forth, and those people may exert a great deal of influence in what bubbles up to be the recommendations that the president receives and that eventually translates into his policy. So if we ignore those people farther down the ladder, we're going to get the analysis wrong, because they are the people shaping the views. And of course, that's just one side. The Iranians have their own set of advisors. I suspect that Ali Khamenei doesn't know a lot about uranium enrichment. He probably knows more than he cares to know, but he's probably not an expert on it. He turns to people as well to get advice. So if we want to analyze problems, we need to pay attention to a large number of people who are shaping the choices. People who are advisors, people who are lobbyists, people who are in interest groups, people who can organize street demonstrations, anybody who can shape how others will think about the choice that they should make. Real decision makers who don't have the benefits of a computer model sadly tend to have to take intellectual shortcuts. So they don't pay attention to all those many influencers. They say, well, yeah, there are 50, 60, 80, 100, 200 people trying to shape things. There are 5 factorial possible interactions of interest. That's 120. Actually, only 60 of them are really important, at least according to my model, and a smart person can keep that straight in their head. If you have 10 decision makers, still a very small problem, there are 3.6 million possible interactions, 10 factorial. Nobody can keep that straight in their head. Again, we don't really care about all of those, at least I don't. I do care about a little over 5,000 of them, and nobody can keep that straight in their heads. Now think about writing down a model. So a model is just a bundle of equations. It's math. But the math means that the logic is transparent. You can work through exactly how one goes from input information to results. It will work 24 hours a day. It can crunch through all of the possible interactions. So it is certainly not smarter than a smart decision maker, but it is better equipped to pay attention to all of the subtle, nuanced details that real people have to skip over and, unfortunately, sometimes, as a result, make errors. Hence, I believe the explanation for why the model gets about 90% right and intelligence analysts get a lot less right, because they have to take the intellectual shortcuts. Okay, so if we keep track of all of that information, then what are the data that we need? We're going to work out what people are going to do. You'll be surprised to find out how little you actually need to know. You need to know, what does each player say it wants? What's its position on the issue? Not what in its heart of hearts does it really want. Very hard to know that. But what is the position that it has staked out? Because that's a strategically chosen position. You can work backwards from that to draw some interesting inferences about them. What do they say they want? How important is the issue to them? How willing are they to drop what they are doing and pay attention to the issue when it comes up instead of something else that they have to deal with? How high a priority is it? How resolved are they? That is, how much are they committed to finding an agreement, even if it's not the outcome they desire, compared to being committed to sticking to their position, even if it means coming to no agreement, going down in a blaze of glory. And finally, we need one more piece of information about everybody. How much clout could they bring to bear? How persuasive could they be if they chose to be? So, what do they say they want? How focused are they on the problem? How resolved are they? How influential could they be? 4 numbers for each player. If we know those 4 numbers, we can plug that into a game like my computer model, which, by the way, if you want to try it, you can play this game. You can download it. It's on www.predictionyearsgame.com. So you can fiddle with it. It's set up so that you can make predictions, but you can't engineer. Just 4 numbers for each party. Now notice what I have not included. Nothing about emotions. Game theory does not deal with emotions, except if emotions are used strategically to gain advantage. But real, raw emotion has no place. I have said nothing about history. I love history. I read a lot of history. I've written some about history. But I've not mentioned history as an input to the model. I've not mentioned culture. That is the very things that most people think are central to working out what's going to happen in the world. Now, I believe that history and culture shape those 4 numbers for each of the players. But if we have the 4 numbers, we don't have to know what shaped them. All we have to do is know those 4 numbers. It's like walking in on a chess game. You come into the middle of a chess game, it's black's moved, you look at the board, You don't know how the board got where it is, but you can work out what's the next move for black to make if you're a reasonably decent chess player. You don't have to know how the game got there. You know that the players are self-interested. They want to win. And therefore, you can work out what they're going to do. I believe firmly if people think they have a method for predicting and engineering the future, they should come out and state what they think is going to happen. And if there's time, why, rather than after the fact say, oh, I knew that was going to happen. I realized that. Or after the fact, provide an explanation. It's incredibly easy to fit facts to known outcomes. The hard challenge is to dare to be embarrassed and make the predictions before the events happen. So let me talk a little bit about the upcoming Copenhagen meeting, designed to try to control greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. My analyses indicate that we may get an agreement out of Copenhagen. It will be meaningless. Why will it be meaningless? It is the nature of universal treaties to be meaningless. What is the nature of a universal agreement? So it has to be an agreement that just about everybody will sign, otherwise it's not universal. Why will they sign? Universal agreements ask people to do one of two things. Either they ask them not to change their behavior, in which case they're perfectly happy to sign and comply because it doesn't ask them to do anything, or it asks them to fundamentally change their behavior and then lacks teeth. It either has no monitoring mechanism to detect cheating, or if it has a monitoring mechanism, it has no way to enforce punishment. So as we think ahead to Copenhagen, let me reflect back on Kyoto. 175 countries signed Kyoto. The United States did not, but 175 did. Now, people were ecstatic about such a broad-based agreement. Really, for the first time, we were going to take charge of global warming. Unfortunately, they didn't read the fine print. So of the 175 signatories to Kyoto, 137 have to do nothing except report on what they have done. We are proud to report this year we have done nothing. We are in full compliance with the Kyoto Protocol. As we promised, we have reported. 137 out of 175 had to do nothing. Well, the host country came forward. We deeply regret we are unable to meet the greenhouse gas emission standards that we signed. And the British in lockstep did the same and lots of others. And what was the consequence? None. There's no punishment in the Kyoto Protocol. There's no consequence for signing and then violating the agreement. And that is the nature of universal agreements. They either ask people to do nothing, so of course they comply, or they ask them to do something serious, and then they shut their eyes so they can't see whether or not they're actually doing it, or they're in violation. Now we have to ask then, why do people promote universal treaties instead of taking unilateral action? And the answer is actually quite straightforward. If you can say, well, we can't cut our greenhouse gas emissions because, after all, India and China and Brazil and some other rapidly developing countries are not cutting theirs, it would be unfair to put our citizens face a burden while these other people continue to pollute. Stepping back and saying, I have a different plan. We will unilaterally impose very high taxes on fossil fuel use. Two main fossil fuel uses that are heavy polluters. Gasoline, you know that. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know. Fertilizer. Fertilizer is a bigger greenhouse gas emitter than gasoline. So if we put a heavy tax on fertilizer and on gasoline, it will be more expensive to drive big cars, and it'll be more expensive to buy produce at the supermarket. Now we can figure out why this doesn't happen. Now we could use those tax dollars to help compensate the Indians, the Chinese, and so forth for switching to cleaner energy sources. And we could use some of the leftover money to sponsor research on cleaner energy uses. But I'm sure that you all know that foreign aid is very unpopular. Because what happens is the voter looks at this and says, oh, I'm not going to vote for somebody who's taxing me to give money to people in some faraway country that I've never been to, never going to visit. And so they say no. And therefore the politicians don't make these proposals. Instead, they propose a universal treaty, and then we all feel good when it gets signed and feel disappointed when it doesn't get enforced and don't work out. What was the strategic reasoning behind that? It was the politicians wanted to get reelected, and you were not going to reelect them if they did the right thing. Okay, let me wrap up. Game theory is a transparent form of logic that with data can help to predict the future, not a pie-in-the-sky claim. It's been done. I've been doing it. Others have been doing it for 30 years. It works. Not everything is predictable, but an awful lot is predictable. I at least can't predict markets because my models are concerned with problems that involve the opportunity for negotiation in the face of the threat of coercion. And if you can predict, then there's a very good prospect that you can find better solutions to problems, that you can engineer. You can find better approaches that will change how other people perceive the situation they're in, change their beliefs, and produce better outcomes. Thank you very much.